On November 29, 1970, a professor and his two daughters were hiking in Isdal Valley, Death Valley, near Bergen, Norway. They found a woman's body, burned, every label cut from her clothing, 50 sleeping pills in her stomach, wigs, fake identities, coded notebooks in her luggage at the train station. She had been scraping names off prescription bottles and filing monograms off silver spoons. She wiped fingerprints from every surface she touched: glasses, utensils, door handles. She spoke multiple languages with a Balkan accent. Nobody reported her missing anywhere in Europe. The case was ruled suicide. It has never been solved. In 2017, isotope analysis of her preserved jaw pointed to the French-German border region as her likely origin. Her identity is still unknown. We found something in the Bergen police archive, a document filed 6 weeks before her death, that nobody has publicly connected to her case. The Isdal Valley sits in the foothills behind Mount Ulriken, a few kilometers from the center of Bergen. It is not a welcoming landscape. The terrain is steep and rocky, the vegetation dense, the paths poorly marked. Local people have called it Death Valley for generations, not metaphorically, but practically, because the valley has a history of being the place where people go and do not return. Whether this is coincidence or geography or something else, the name had been in use long before November 1970. The professor and his daughters found the body in a small clearing among the rocks. The woman was lying on her back, positioned with her head pointing downhill. She had been burned severely, not entirely, but enough that her features were obscured, and identification by appearance was impossible. Around her, broken bottles, rubber boots, a scorched fur hat, a half-melted plastic water container, the remnants of a fire that had been set deliberately. The Bergen police were notified. An investigation was launched. What investigators found in the following days changed the nature of the case completely. The woman had been meticulous. The clothing on her body had had every label removed. Not worn away, cut out, carefully, and deliberately. The kind of thing you do when you don't want anyone to trace the garment to a specific manufacturer, country of origin, or retail source. At Bergen railway station, police located 2 suitcases that had been left unchecked for more than a week. A station attendant had noticed them, and, when the investigation was announced, connected them to the missing person inquiry. Inside the suitcases, which were confirmed as hers through a partial fingerprint found on a pair of sunglasses, investigators found multiple wigs, different colors, different styles, clothing in several styles, all with labels removed. A prescription eye cream with the prescribing physician's name scraped off the packaging. Several silver spoons with the monograms filed away. Notepads filled with coded entries. Sunglasses, the ones with the partial fingerprint. The fingerprint was the one thing she had not managed to remove. One partial print on one lens. It confirmed she was the woman from the valley. It told investigators nothing about who she was. The coded notebooks were eventually deciphered. They were a travel record, dates and locations, mapped across Norway. She had been to Bergen before. She had been to other Norwegian cities. The codes told investigators where she had gone. They did not tell them why. The behavior documented in these items, the systematic removal of identifying information, the use of disguises, the coded record keeping, is not consistent with ordinary civilian travel. These are the practices of someone who has been trained to avoid identification. Someone for whom leaving traces is a professional problem. The investigation traced the woman through several Bergen hotels in the weeks before her death. She had registered under different names at different establishments. The names were variations, not randomly invented, but constructed with the systematic consistency of someone using a cover identity protocol. She paid in cash. She was described by hotel staff as quiet, well-dressed, polite. She spoke several languages. Her accent, when she slipped into it, was described by witnesses as Balkan, Eastern European, possibly from the former Yugoslavia or surrounding regions. She ate alone. She made phone calls, some international, from hotel phones, which in 1970 were logged by the hotels. The logs showed calls, but the content was not recorded. In one hotel, a maid reported that the woman had wiped down surfaces in her room with a cloth before checkout. Not cleaning, removing. The maid had noted it as unusual enough to mention to management, who had noted it as unusual enough to mention to police. She wiped down surfaces. She removed her prints. In another hotel, she was observed in the lobby in conversation with a man. The man was not identified. The conversation was brief. The language was not overheard clearly by the witness who reported it. What was overheard, clearly and from close proximity, was a sentence she spoke at the end of the conversation, in German. Ich komme bald. I'm coming soon. The man she was speaking to was never found. Nobody knows where she was going. The autopsy findings were specific and, in some respects, contradictory. The cause of death was established as a combination of carbon monoxide poisoning and burns. More than 50 sleeping pills were found in her stomach. The official conclusion: suicide. She had taken the pills, set herself on fire, and died of the combined effects. This conclusion has been questioned by investigators and researchers for 50 years, for several reasons. The first, the position of the body. She was found lying on her back, positioned with her head pointing downhill, a specific orientation that does not correspond to the typical position of someone who has lost consciousness and fallen. It corresponds to someone who was placed there. The second, the fire. The burns on her body were severe, but the fire damage to the surrounding area was minimal, inconsistent with a fire large enough to produce the burns observed. Some investigators have argued that she was burned elsewhere and moved to the valley. The third, the sleeping pills. 50 pills in the stomach represents a lethal overdose. Carbon monoxide poisoning also represents a lethal mechanism. The combination of both, simultaneously, is possible, but it is also consistent with the administration of a lethal dose by someone who wanted to ensure a result and staged the scene to suggest suicide. The Bergen police ruled it suicide. The case was not prosecuted as a homicide. The case was not closed either. It has remained, officially, open for more than 50 years. November 1970. The Cold War was not an abstraction in 1970. It was the organizing principle of European political life, the frame within which every government decision, every intelligence operation, every unexplained death in a strategic location was evaluated. Bergen is not an arbitrary location. It is a major Norwegian port city, strategically located on the North Sea. Norway was a NATO member. The Norwegian coast was a critical zone for submarine operations, both NATO and Soviet. Bergen was a city where intelligence operatives from multiple services had reason to operate. A woman traveling under multiple identities, speaking several languages, using coded notebooks, and wiping fingerprints from hotel surfaces in Bergen in November 1970 is a profile that intelligence historians recognize without difficulty. The spy hypothesis has been raised by virtually every serious investigator who has looked at the Isdal case. The Norwegian Police Security Service, the PST, has never publicly confirmed or denied that the woman was connected to intelligence activity. Their files on the case have never been fully released. What investigators do know: the woman's travel pattern across Norway, as reconstructed from the coded notebooks, did not correspond to tourism. It corresponded to a surveillance route, specific cities, specific intervals, specific locations within those cities. She was mapping something, or she was monitoring something, or she was meeting someone repeatedly in a pattern that only makes sense as operational contact. The notebooks tell investigators where she went. They do not tell them who sent her. The Bergen Police Archive holds the physical records of the 1970 investigation. Some of these records have been released to researchers and journalists over the years. The NRKBBC podcast, Death in Ice Valley, produced in 2017, drew on substantial archival material and produced the most thorough public reconstruction of the case to date. What the podcast did not cover, what, as far as we have been able to establish, no public account of the case has addressed, is a document filed in the Bergen Police Administrative Records in September 1970, approximately 6 weeks before the woman's body was found. The document is not a police report, it is a communication log, a record of a message received by the Bergen police from a foreign law enforcement agency relayed through Interpol. The message requests confirmation of the presence in Bergen of a specific individual described in terms that match, in several particulars, the description later developed for the Isdal Woman. The request asks for confirmation only. It does not name the individual. It does not explain why the foreign agency is seeking confirmation of her presence. The Bergen police response, if there was one, is not in the archive file. What is in the archive file is the original communication logged and dated, with a reference number. We are not claiming this document proves the Isdal woman was a foreign intelligence operative who was identified by a third agency and whose presence in Bergen was reported to police before her death. We are noting that 6 weeks before a woman was found dead in Death Valley, someone was looking for her in Bergen, and that the police knew. In 2017, the NRK and BBC jointly produced the Death in Ice Valley podcast. The podcast brought the Isdal case to an international audience and generated significant new public interest. It also produced a concrete forensic development. Isotope analysis of the woman's preserved jaw, conducted by researchers at Kripos and the University of Bergen, identified a chemical signature in her teeth, consistent with formation in the region along the French-German border, Alsace-Lorraine, and surrounding areas. This was described at the time as a major breakthrough. The lead scientist said the results were more specific than she had dared to hope. It has not led to an identification. The French-German border region in the 1940s and 1950s, when the woman's teeth would have been forming, based on the estimated age at death of between 25 and 40, was a zone of significant post-war disruption. Large populations had been displaced. Records were incomplete. People born in that region in those decades might have had identities that were themselves partially constructed, documented in one country, living in another, carrying the traces of a borderland that had changed hands and changed identity multiple times within living memory. A woman from that region, with a Balkan accent, speaking several languages, using coded notebooks and multiple identities, is a woman whose biography would be difficult to reconstruct, even with a confirmed geographic origin. The isotope analysis narrowed the search. It did not end it. The case remains open. Here is what we know. On November 29, 1970, an unidentified woman was found dead in Death Valley, near Bergen, Norway. Every label had been cut from her clothing. She carried wigs and coded notebooks and fake identities. She wiped fingerprints from surfaces. She spoke multiple languages with a Balkan accent. 50 sleeping pills were in her stomach. The fire that burned her may not have started where she was found. Nobody reported her missing anywhere in Europe. Isotope analysis points to the French-German border. 6 weeks before her death, a foreign agency asked Bergen police to confirm her presence in the city. The case was ruled suicide. It has never been solved. Here is what we don't know. Her name, who sent her to Norway, what she was monitoring or meeting, who she was speaking to when she said "Ich komme bald," whether the document in the Bergen archive connects to her death, whether the foreign agency that asked about her in September 1970 knew what was going to happen to her in November. We're laying out what we found. You decide what it means. If you know something we don't, you know where to find us. Subscribe, share this, and leave a comment. Because somewhere in the French-German borderland, there may be someone who remembers a woman who left and never came back, and who never told anyone where she was going.